Hello, everyone. This is Assistant Lecturer Sabrina Abdulkadhom, and I am one of the participants at Al-Ahwaz conference with my research today that is entitled Nature-Oriented Verse, an Ecopoetic Critical Review of Romantic Poetry. Before I start with my research paper, I really want to thank all the organizers of Al-Ahwaz conference for their um, great organization and allowing us to participate with our research paper. So a special thanks to them. And we will proceed with the research that I have just entitled. So we are going to talk today about nature-oriented verse, or our responsibility, or let's say our individual responsibility of living on this planet. Okay, everyone has a responsibility that he or she should stick to, and that's why I found it very important to talk about or to remind everyone of their responsibility here on planet Earth. So, my research paper will include the meaning of nature-oriented verse. First of all, we are going to define it. Then we will talk about poetry in the Romantic Age, because we know that the Romantic Age talks about nature specifically. And then we are going to talk about a new form of poetry, which is found very recently. And it also talks about nature, but in a kind of different way. We call it eco-poetry, and there are a lot of critics about it. So we are going to talk about eco-criticism as well and give it a definition. Then we will give an example of an eco-poet, namely Margaret Atwood. And then we will compare eco-poetry with romantic poetry, and we see and we will study, or this research will show, if there are any similarities between the two kinds of nature poetry, and if we can consider part of the romantic poetry as an eco poetry. So, what is nature-oriented verse, or how can I define it? Well, we can first of all see that the 20th century, okay, or the previous century that we're was or preceding the 21st century, of course, we see that people started to be really interested in the natural environment. So people start to be very affected of how nature works and how we should have a relationship between our human society and nature. So, with the new studies, with the new discoveries, people started to have new perceptions of nature, right? And people started to tell their stories and write their poetry and describe nature in a different way as well. So that's why the manner of how nature has been approached and analyzed in poetry has drastically changed. So, with the new perspective on nature, people started to tell their stories and analyze nature in a different way, whether they talk, whether they write poetry, or whether they do anything nature related. So, nature is not a new concept in poetry, of course, because we have an age which is called the Romantic Age, and these poets in the Romantic Age were very much interested in the concept of nature. So, or approaching the concept of nature is not very new, let's say, okay, but a new way of approaching nature is eco poetry. Okay, so we will evaluate, is there any relationship between romantic poetry and eco poetry? This is the aim of this study. So, let me quickly remind you of what the Romantic Age means, because it's very important to understand their aims. So, the Romantic Age started with William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge with publishing their book of poetry. It's called the Lyrical Ballads, and that was specifically in 1798. So, with their publication of the book, many consider it as the start of the Romantic Age. So, why? What is or how is this book different from the age that preceded it, or what we call the Age of Reason? Because before that, or this book, really emphasized on the importance of expressing yourself, of showing your feelings and your emotions, okay? which is actually against the rationalism that was during the 18th century, and against science and against neoclassicism. Okay, so everything that had reason was the aim of this age. So the Romantic age were not very much interested in giving reasons in everything. So emotions and feelings were also very important. So the Romantics started to attack this kind of thing. Okay, it's not only the things that have reason that we should discuss. There are also things that are unreasonable that we should discuss. So they joined the French Revolution. Okay, who were also searching for democracy and breaking the law, okay, to express themselves more. So they joined the French Revolution, and we see that new forms of literature appeared. So this led to the formation of Romantic, and when we say Romantic, we should, of course, think of it as not only the positive, the man-woman relationship. No, it also can refer to anything that's fictional or imaginative or even the bizarre. So all the positive or the negative things that can be felt or that can be imagined or that can be placed into fiction can be covered within the term of Romantic. So to sum things up, we can say that the Romantics, okay, were very much appreciating nature. Okay, they wanted to express their emotions rather than everything that had reason and that needed intellect. Okay, so they were interested in nature, in emotions. They were also very much interested in expressing themselves or expressing their own personalities, okay, rather than discussing societal problems. They also focused on their personal struggles and their passions, and they loved expressing their imagination and their culture and even their heroisms, and that is, of course, also partly fictional. And everything that's mysterious and unexplainable, they were very much interested in writing about such things. So the Romantic age has nothing to do with only the thinkable, okay? Anything that's unthinkable and anything that's related to nature was the main interest of the Romantics. So if we want to come and define Romanticism, we can say that it's a literary, artistic, and philosophical movement that originated in the 18th century, and it was a reaction against neoclassicism and an emphasis on imagination and emotions. This is according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. So now that we understand what Romanticism is, when it happened in the 18th century, and what their major motifs are, which are expressing emotions and personal struggles and their feelings and talking about nature, now we come to eco-poetry. So let's put Romantic poetry aside and understand what eco-poetry means. So eco-poetry has also is also dealing with nature, just like Romantic poetry. So it is actually a modern term that's not yet established a clear definition, okay? So we cannot define eco-poetry just yet because it's very modern, okay? But it actually has to do with certain discoveries and certain scientific studies that happened, and specifically when we talk about global warming. And I am sure that you have heard of global warming, which is the unusual rapid increase in Earth's average surface temperature. Okay, so this means that planet Earth is warming up really fast, or faster than that is actually normal, and that's because of the greenhouse gases that are released by people burning fossil fuels. Our planet is actually warming up, okay, and we can notice the heat that is happening right now in these modern ages. That's all because we are burning fossil fuels. So we are using cars, we are using factories, we are using or releasing gases which we call greenhouse gases, and these gases are trapped within the Earth's surface, and this causes the Earth to warm up, or this phenomena is called global warming. So This is actually the idea, okay, that eco-poetry talks about. These problems are expressed in the poetry of, or in the field of eco-poetry. So we can say that eco-poetry, or some even call it green poetry, it includes recent nature poems, okay? So these are also poems that talk about nature, but they talk about nature in a scientific way. Okay, not like romantic poetry, who talk about nature in an emotional way. No, eco poets talk about nature in a scientific way. Okay, so recent nature poems which engage directly with environmental issues. Okay, so any problem that happens in the environment and that's related to nature is the major aim of eco poetry. It's also possible to define eco poetry as the human cooperation with nature, conceived as dynamic interrelated series of cyclic feedback system. So we can see that human beings have to consider nature as something important in their lives, because we are part of the system of nature. We are not separate from it. Okay. Another definition is that it's a category of poetry which advocates political and ethical values. Okay, so we should give it a political concern, we should give it an ethical concern, and some even call it cli-fi, okay, which is the abbreviation of climate fiction, okay, has been coined to identify this body of work that centrally addresses the issue of climate change, okay? Because climate change is very dangerous, as we know, okay? We cannot allow the planet to warm up without acting, so poets really want to discuss and address the issue of climate change in order to make a change. So, what is the aim of the eco-poets then? They want to challenge and reconfigure the reader's perception, okay? So they want to wake people up with their ideas, okay? And we want the reader to put the book down and live your life to the fullest in all possible dimensions of moments of first-hand experience within nature's supportive second skin, and to become more responsible about the necessary second skin. So, in other words, it means that they want to reinstall the relationship between nature and human societies. So maybe we can think of nature as something that's secondary, okay? Which one of us goes and treats the trees and the plants in a normal way, or as a part of his or her life? Very few do that, in fact, okay? Because we think of nature as a secondary society or a secondary world. But eco-poets really want to show that nature is actually part of us, okay? We cannot separate nature from human societies. And that's what eco-poetry is for, okay? Because nature is part of human society, and human society is part of nature, and we cannot separate between the two. Because if nature is healthy, then our society will be healthy, and if we are not healthy, then nature will be affected negatively. So we should take action. So this poetry is written to take action, or for action, rather than just reading the poem. So we have critics who approach this kind of poetry, and they say that the study of literature and the environment developed in response to growing recognition and awareness of environmental crisis in many parts of the world in the decades after the Second World War. So after the Second World War, we see that interest in eco-poetry and increased, and people started to criticize or evaluate eco-poetry in a way that they showed their recognition, and they spread their awareness that indeed there are environmental crises going on. So, it examines how narratives and other forms of cultural representation influence and are affected by environmental concerns and crises. So, what kind of poetry can I consider as eco-poetry? Only the narratives that show environmental concerns, or that describe any crisis that are going on into the environment, okay? And we can say that eco-criticism started with Jonathan Bate, when he published Romantic Ecology, Wordsworth and the Environmental Tradition in 1991. And this is the first person who approached romantic poetry into the field of ecology. Okay, so he started to analyze romantic poetry and see whether romantics had a concern, or did they have a concern for nature to be in a good relationship with human beings. Should we human beings treat nature well? Should we make it as part of our lives? Or do romantic poets actually give nature their correct, or its correct place within the world? This is what Jonathan Bate started with in 1991. There is also association like the Association for the Study of Literature and the Environment, or also known as ASLE, and they published their journal Interdisciplinary Studies in Literature and Environment. And they also talked about anything that talks about nature and that gives a concern of any environmental crises or issues. So, and more people started to publish their books, publish their literary productions, and show that or evaluate poetry that deals with nature, whether it is considered as eco-poetry or not. So it's a new field of study that is going on in the recent modern literary field. So if we want to give them or eco-poetry general characteristics, we can say that eco-poetry does not show that human beings are the most important species, okay, or the most important society. No, everything that is not human is also important. They are not just a mere backdrop, okay, or they are not secondary. No, just as we people are important, animals, trees, nature in general is also very important. And the expansion of human interest beyond humanity, okay, we should not be interested in ourselves just, okay. So it's not only about building the city, building ourselves, building our human societies. No, we should also think beyond humanity. Okay, there is more things to live up to. And 3, a sense of human accountability to the environment and of the environment as a process rather than a constant or given. So we should not, think of the environment as we should take from it, okay, without giving or giving it something, okay? So we senselessly just taking down trees is not the answer, okay? We should care for nature. We can take or take away things from nature, but we should not only take from it, we should also give it its importance. An ecological and biocentric perspective, recognizing the interdependent nature of the world, okay? So we should make it as something that's interdependent, okay? We should not consider it as something separate. So we should reconcile our relationship with nature, and we should not, have this limit between us, okay? This is what we understand from the eco-poetry. So eco-poetry does give us a warning, okay, that over-technologized or that our over-technologized modern world is not good, okay, we are condemning it. And poetry, or this kind of poetry, is also giving us a warning that we should actually stop this catastrophe, okay? We should stop hurting nature, otherwise nature will hurt us. An example of an eco-poet is Margaret Atwood, and we will see that her poetry is, in fact, showing us a disaster and showing or giving us a warning, okay? And this is her poem, The Weather, and if we come and read an extract from it, okay, or let's go back, we see that there are many, many descriptions and many, many warnings, okay? And she is actually saying that the weather is creeping up behind us, okay? So, in other words, we as human beings, we are seeing volcanoes erupting. We are seeing, the rivers flooding. We're seeing all these natural disasters that are happening. We are witnessing in Germany, for example, and Europe in general. Okay, we are seeing these floods and the destruction that it caused people. Okay, that is because of our, senseless and because of our ignorance of nature. Okay, so it's like the weather is creeping up behind us. Okay, we don't care, we don't care, we don't care, and we keep up not caring for nature. And that is when weather starts to creep behind us and attack us like a snake or a thug or a panther. Okay, and when you see a storm that is happening or flood that's happening, this is because of our actions, and we made weather act in such a horrible way. So it's an extraordinary poem, okay, and it shows how the weather is changing. And the weather is changing, or Margaret Atwood says that the weather is changing because we humankind are not giving it or giving the nature its full rights, okay? And we are not caring for nature, and that's where nature gets angry and enrages and attacks us, okay? And she says we because not only she is responsible for the weather to act in such a horrible way, but we human beings as a whole, okay, are responsible because we are ignoring all of these catastrophes, and we are not giving the nature its importance. Okay, so she says the weather crept up behind us like a snake and then cut loose, okay, and then attacked us. So we can see that there is an importance for nature. Okay, there's importance for the non-human. It's not just a mere backdrop, okay, because it can decide our fate. And we should give it an interest. We should not be interested in ourselves only, okay? There's also, or we can also see that a sense of human accountability to the environment, okay? We are responsible for anything the weather is showing and the weather is acting, okay? We are responsible, or she's holding all of us responsible. And she also shows that nature and its reaction is affected by humans' actions, okay? So everything we do, if we treat nature well, then it treats us well in return. And if we do not treat it well, then we have an ecological and biocentric attack. Also, she tries to show that we should have a good relationship, okay? Human and non-human should have a good relationship, and she is condemning the things that limit this relationship, like the over-technologized modern world, okay? And she's warning us that if we not reconcile a good relationship with the human with the non-human, then we will have catastrophes. Like, for example, the lines that I read for you, which is that the weather is going to creep behind us if we do not make it as part of our lives. So we come back to our essential question, which is, do romantic poets show importance of nature, or do they discuss environmental crises and catastrophes? And do they give us a warning that we should treat nature well? Well, actually, there are some signs, okay, that show us that some poets are giving, in fact, some warnings, or they show that nature has an importance, okay? So it's true that Wordsworth loves nature, okay? But he gives it an important role, and he says that love of nature leads to love of mankind. So only if we love nature, we can love ourselves, okay? Otherwise, there is no, let's say, good and refined love. So we return to the term romanticism, and we say that this is starting points towards the construction of eco-poetry. Okay, so we can say that romanticism gives us little hints, okay, even if the poets are not aware of the meaning of eco-poetry, but they start giving us hints, okay, that nature is important and that we should give it its full rights, okay? So ecologists say they divide environmental ethics generally into shallow ecology and deep ecology. Okay, so when we come and see the environment, okay, we have people who give ecology a shallow role and some who give ecology a deep role. Okay, and with shallow role, it means that people like us, okay, give nature a secondary role. But we should actually all have a deep perspective of nature. And we should not have nature on a secondary level. No, we should give it a distinctive role and make it as part of our world. Okay. So we have a critic who is called Naz, okay, and he shows the importance of deep ecology, okay, and he says that this is actually a theory, okay, and this theory he says that we all have an ecological self, okay, and this ecological self exists in our human consciousness, okay, so me, you, everyone has an ecological self, okay, but we choose to ignore it or we choose to develop it, okay, so some or most of us ignore it, okay, we do not care about trees and plants and everything that is or every crisis that goes on, okay, that's most of us, we ignore it, okay, but there are some people who develop it, okay, and we can see when children are just in their young ages, okay, we see that they're very much related to animals and nature, and they love playing in the, let's say, the wild or in the environment, okay, or in the surrounding environment. But as we grow up, we start ignoring it, or most of us try to ignore it. Okay, so he says that no, we should, okay, continue giving it its interest because the ecological self is part of our conscious. So we should not, ignore it. We should not forget about it. No, we should continuously make it as part of our behavior and part of our true self. Okay. So we have, for example, we have William Wordsworth. He says that he's having a blessed mood, okay, that has the capability to understand the life of things, okay? So he is saying that he has an ecological self, okay? And that he has the ability to understand the life of things, okay? So he's appreciating the life of things, not only humans, okay? And for example, in his poem, A Slumber Did My Spirit Seal, okay, he says, rolled round in earth's diurnal course with rocks and stones and trees. So he's even giving the rocks and the stones and the trees, he's giving them their importance, okay? And he says, I am part of them, and especially when I die, okay? I am part of them, I'm part of nature. So he's not separating his human self from the nature self, or from the ecological self. So in another poem, which is entitled Lines Left Upon a Seat in a Yew Tree, okay, he also says the lines, the man whose eye is ever on himself doth look on one, the least of nature's work, okay? So what he's trying to say here, he says that he wants people not to be selfish, okay? So if you are selfish and if you talk only about yourself and you care only about developing your human self without developing your ecological self, then I've got news for you, that you will hurt yourself, okay? Because if you do not appreciate nature, then you are not going to appreciate yourself. We have another romantic poet who is Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and in his poem, This Lime Tree Bower, My Prisons, or in My Prison, he says that henceforth I shall know that nature never deserts the wise and pure, no plot so narrow be but nature there, no waste so vacant, but may well employ each faculty of sense and keep the heart awake to love and beauty. So he's also showing the importance of nature, also showing the importance of the ecological self, okay? We cannot separate or forget or ignore the ecological self because as children, this is a part of ourself, or this is part of our true self, and if we decide to forget and ignore it, then we lost ourselves. Okay, so nature is an essential source for our or for us human beings, okay? And that's why this kind of thinking or manner of thinking proves that they have an ecological self, and that proves that they are actually writing eco-poetry. So, another romantic poet, which is Percy Bysshe Shelley, he also wrote a poem, okay, and he shows that, or he steps into a much deeper perspective with the exclamation that nature is both resplendent and deadly, okay? He shows that nature does not only give, no, it actually also takes, okay? So it has power, okay? It has not only beauty, okay? It has not only tranquility, no, it can also destroy. So in his poem Mont Black or Blank, he shows this idea very, very clearly. And Wordsworth in his poem Tintern Abbey, okay, he also shows that nature has healing powers, okay? So if we give it its interest, we can heal ourselves into the way that should be, okay? Because we always, when we want to, give ourselves a rest, we turn to nature. Most of us do that, okay? So Wordsworth is saying, why don't we always make nature as part of ourselves so we will not have this troubled self? Okay, so because romantics did not know about eco-poetry and they have not, started this movement, we can consider their poetry, or most of their poetry that show any ecopoetic characteristics, we can show that, or we can consider it as we can consider it as proto-ecological in nature, or proto-ecological poetry. So, as a conclusion, not all the romantic poets have written eco-poetry, but the ones or the poems that have ecopoetic characteristics. In other words, any poem or any romantic poem that includes any warning, okay, or any expression that we should have an ecological self, or any sign that we should reconcile our relationship with nature, and that nature is the only way to discover our true, genuine selves. This is this can be considered as proto-ecological poetry. So I hope that this presentation has made you understand what the meaning of romantic poetry is and what the meaning of eco-poetry is, and that there is a possible connection between the two, although there are also good differences between the two. Okay, but we can connect them in a way if they constitute any warning for our human world, and that we should not separate it from the natural world. So with this, I really hope that you enjoyed this research. I have chosen this research in the same, or for the same aim that ecopoets do. I do wish from my heart that we make a change and that we help our world to become a better place by treating it the way it deserves. So we should release less green gases, or greenhouse effect gases. We should take care of nature. We should give it the role or the place that it deserves. So thank you so much, and I hope that you have benefited from this research. Thank you for listening. This was Assistant Lecturer Sabrina Abdulkadhom, and I hope that I can, inshallah, participate in the next conference by God's will. Thank you again, and goodbye.